My husband and I scratched off a $5 million lottery ticket at a lottery shop before we even had time to celebrate. The rosary I had worn since childhood suddenly snapped, a single bead cracking clean off the chain. Without another word, I grabbed him and tried to buy tickets that very night to flee back to the southwestern mountains. The lottery shop owner stared at me in shock. My husband clung to the metal shutter and roared, "Have you lost your mind?" But I gripped that broken wooden bead tightly. "We leave now." My husband flung my hand away, his eyes bloodshot. "I'm claiming this prize today. If you dare run, we're getting divorced." I nodded without hesitation. "Fine, the 5 million. Plus the used car at home I'll go to you. I'll leave with nothing. But tonight, I have to leave the city." Daniel Lawson stared at me, the $5 million scratch-off ticket crumpled in his fist. Even the lottery shop owner froze, cigarette ash falling onto his pants, without him noticing. "Maya Carter, are you out of your mind?" Daniel slammed his fist against the glass counter so hard that a row of cheap figurines toppled over. "That's 5 million. Even after taxes, it's still 4 million. He jabbed a finger in my face, it spraying me. "And now you're telling me you want to go back to that dirt poor mountain hole in the middle of nowhere you just can't stand seeing me do? Well, can you?" I could not hear his yelling anymore. The broken bead in my palm was still warm. It came from the rosary my grandmother had carved from a tree struck by lightning deep in the mountains. I had worn it for 24 years. Fire could not burn it, water could not rot it, and a blade had never left a mark on it. But the instant we scratched open the winning number, it cracked against my chest with a sharp piercing sound. The topmost bead, the one nearest the small wooden cross, had snapped clean off the chain. The break was smooth as if cut by an invisible blade. "The car keys are on the coffee table at home. The savings account password is your birthday. You can have all of it. I don't want anything." I gritted my teeth, shoved aside the arm he used to block me, turned and ran outside. The sky was terrifyingly dark, heavy clouds pressing down over the city. Daniel caught up in a few strides and grabbed the back of my collar. The force yanked me backward, and I fell hard on the steps. Outside the lottery shop, my knees struck the concrete with a dull thud. Before the pain even reached me, Daniel had already crouched down and clamped his hands around my shoulders. "What are you trying to do?" His voice was low and vicious. "Are you trying to run off to find that first love of yours?" "First, let me tell you, Maya Carter, I scratched that ticket. You're not taking a single cent." His eyes were full of suspicion and calculation. 5 million had stripped away his disguise completely. I looked coldly at the man I had shared a bed with for 3 years. There was no time. I wrenched free of his hands and rushed to the curb. A cab with its vacant sign lit was waiting at the light. I pulled open the door and climbed into the back seat. Then I took out the 20,000 in cash I had just withdrawn and threw it onto the passenger seat. "Out of the city. Get on the highway, drive southwest," I shouted at the driver. "Floor it, all that money is yours." The driver was a balding, middle-aged man. He jumped in fright and instinctively looked as if he wanted to throw me out, but when his eyes flicked to the stack of cash, he swallowed. Daniel had already reached the window and was pounding on the glass. "Open the door, you crazy woman. Get out, sir. Drive." I stared at the driver with a bloodless face. "He beats me. I'm running for my life." The driver clenched his teeth and yanked the wheel. The cab shot forward with a screech of tires in the rearview mirror. Daniel grew smaller and smaller. I collapsed against the back seat, cold sweat soaking through my clothes. I opened my right hand. From the grain of the broken bead, a red of dark red liquid seeped out. It was blood. The speedometer pushed past 80, and the scenery outside blurred into streaks. I stared at the bleeding bead of wood, my whole body cold. Before my grandmother died, her withered fingers had gripped my wrist as she rested. "Maya, this rosary keeps the harm away. A broken bead is a warning. If one ever cracks off, no matter what you're doing, don't look back, run as far as you can." I had always thought it was just mountain superstition until today, when the threat of death came down around me with terrifying clarity. My phone kept vibrating in my bag, the frantic buzz making my heart pound. The screen lit up with message after message. I tapped the top one. It was a video Daniel had posted in the family group chat. The video came from the lottery shop security camera. In it, I looked antic as I shoved him away, hair disheveled. Scrambling into a cab, he had added a long caption, "Everyone, judge this for yourselves. I just scratched off 5 million. And Maya said a bead breaking off her stupid wooden rosary was a bad omen. She wants to divorce me and leave with nothing." She took a cab and ran off overnight, abandoning even our home. I suspect she was mentally triggered, or maybe she has someone outside and is staging this to force me into a divorce and split. The money, the group chat exploded. His older sister wrote, I always said women from the mountains can't be trusted the second big money shows up. Her true colors come out. His uncle wrote, call the police. Let her clean out the savings account. Then my mother-in-law, Daniel Lawson, sent a voice message. The moment I tapped at her shrill scolding stabbed into my ears. Maya, you jinx, my son finally got lucky. And now you're acting crazy. Get back here right now if you dare touch a single cent of that 5 million. I'll fight you to the death. Expressionless, I locked the screen. They only cared about money. Even though I had said I would leave with nothing, they still believed I was plotting for that windfall. Ahead was a tunnel. The car plunged into darkness. I messaged several friends in the city, my fingers shaking badly. Listen to me, no matter what you're doing, leave the city immediately. Do not stay here. The message had barely gone out before a red exclamation mark appeared. I had been kicked out of the group chat. A private message from one of my friends came right after, Maya, you're overdoing it. Daniel already posted the surveillance video on his feed. If you want to keep the prize money for yourself, just say so. Who are you trying to scare with this supernatural act? Disgusting. Smile, and turned off my phone. No one believed me. In everyone's eyes, I was a money-hungry lunatic who had snapped the AB. Exited the tunnel. A road sign ahead showed that the state line was still 90 miles away. If I could make it past the toll plaza, I could leave this place. Miss, your husband called the police. The driver suddenly spoke, his voice tense. He pointed at the ride-hailing app on the console. A platform alert had popped up saying the vehicle was being tracked by family members and police. And the driver was required to stop nearby. Don't stop. I shot upright and threw the remaining jewelry in my bag toward him. I didn't break the law. And I didn't take a cent from him, sir. If you get me across the state line, all of this is yours. The driver looked at me through the rear view mirror, suspicion creeping into his eyes. The car slowed noticeably. It's not about money, he muttered as he turned on the right signal. They said you have mental problems and violent tendencies. I got old folks and kids at home. I can't take that kind of risk. The car gradually slid toward the service area ahead. I looked at the window in despair. 3 a.m. The cab had just stopped in the service area when 2 black SUVs barreled in from the ramp. The shriek of brakes tore through the night. The doors flew open. Daniel jumped out with 4 men and surrounded the cab. The driver went pale with fear and scrambled to unlock the doors. Maya, you can really run, can't you? Daniel yanked open the rear door. Cold wind pouring in with his roar. Get out. He reached in to grab my hair. I had been ready for him. I shrank to the other side and kicked him hard in the wrist. Get away from me. I told you, I don't want anything. Why won't you let me go? Let you go. Daniel sneered, half his body leaning into the car. Out here spreading rumors that something's going to happen in the city. The police came to me saying you're spreading panic. You don't care about shame, but I do. His friends closed in. One of them pulled out black nylon zip ties. Sis, stop making trouble. Daniel, just one big. This is supposed to be a happy thing. Maybe you've been under too much pressure and started seeing things. Come back with us and see a doctor. They called me sis, but their hands showed no mercy. 2 men circled to the other side, forced the door open, clamped my arms from both sides, and dragged me out. My palms scraped against the asphalt, pain drilling into me. Several truck drivers and passers-by in the service area heard the commotion and gathered around. What's going on? Hitting a woman in the middle of the night. Daniel immediately put on a pained expression. Sir, are you have to see this? This is my wife. She's been under too much stress lately and has severe delusions. We won the lottery today, and it triggered her. She insists a bead breaking off the rosary around her neck is some kind of sign from God and says our city is about to be punished. She ran away from home. He pointed at my messy hair. Look at her. How could I not take her back for treatment? The crowd began whispering. So she's mentally ill. Winning the lottery drove her crazy. Poor guy, what bad luck to have a wife like that. Public opinion turned instantly toward Daniel. The cab driver took the chance to stuff the money and jewelry into his pocket, and sped away. I was pinned against a car door by 2 strong men, unable to move. The rosary pressed against my skin, burning so hot I almost fainted. Let go of me. You will regret this. I looked at the cold faces around me and screamed until my throat tore. There is really something wrong with that city. If you go back, now you're going to your death. Smack. Daniel slapped me across the face. My ears rang. Blood filled the corner of my mouth. Cover her mouth. Put her in the car. He had completely lost patience. His face twisted as he ordered his friends. Just as the zip tie was about to loop around my wrist, I lowered my head and bit hard into the hand of the man gripping my left arm. he screamed, and let go. I used the opening to break free. From my coat pocket, I pulled out an eyebrow razor and pressed it directly against the artery in my neck. The blade cut the skin and beads of blood rolled down. If anyone takes one more step, I stared straight at Daniel. I'll die right here in front of you. Everyone went silent. Time dragged by second after second. The east gradually turned pale. Morning light broke through the clouds and spilled across the cold concrete of the service area. Dawn had come far away on the horizon. The outline of the city I had fled shimmered faintly in the morning fog. There were no towering flames, no deafening explosions. Everything was quiet and peaceful. A few trucks began appearing on the highway. Nothing had happened. The onlookers started leaving before they left. The way they looked at me had fully turned into the way people look at a mad woman. All right, young lady. It's daylight now, and nothing happened. Put the blade down and go home with your husband. The cleaning lady shook her head and walked away. The hand holding the eyebrow razor began to tremble. Could I really have been wrong? Had I been too sensitive, turning a cracked bead into a disaster? Daniel caught the wavering in my eyes. He waved for his friends to step back, then slowed his steps, approached me. At that critical moment, Daniel's phone suddenly rang in his pocket. He pulled it out irritably, glanced at the caller ID, then answered on speaker. It was his buddy Big Dave, who ran a pool hall back in the city. The second the call connected, Big Dave's scream rang through the entire service area. Daniel, don't come back, don't fucking come back. Daniel froze. Phone held stiffly in midair. Daniel's hand remained frozen, holding the phone a few inches from his ear. On the screen, the call timer was still ticking, but the only sound coming through the speaker was a wet, erratic scraping noise, like someone dragging a heavy sack of gravel across concrete, interspersed with a high-pitched, warbling static. Dave. Daniel's voice had lost its aggressive edge. It sounded thin, fragile. Dave, quit messing around. What do you mean don't come back? I've got the ticket. We're coming back to celebrate at the hall. Dave. Daniel. The voice came back, but it wasn't Big Dave's booming baritone anymore. It was a wheeze, a desperate gasp for air that sounded like it was being squeezed through a throat lined with broken glass. It's coming. Out of the drains. The sewers. It's not water. It's black. It's like thick oil, but it's rising. The ground it's soft. Daniel. The pool hall the back wall sank. It didn't fall over. It just slid into the earth. Oh God. The smell. It smells like old blood and burnt hair. A wet, choking cough cut him off. Through the phone, a distant, massive sound rumbled, a low, grinding vibration that felt less like an explosion and more like the earth itself yawning open. Dave. Get out of there. Get in your truck. Daniel yelled, his eyes darting frantically to his friends, who had stopped trying to secure my zip ties. Their hands had gone slack. I can't, Dave whispered. The sound of wet footsteps sloshing through liquid came through, followed by a sudden, sickening snap. The air it's heavy. My legs won't. Daniel, don't look back. The sky is. The call didn't disconnect. It simply dissolved into a high-frequency whistle that made everyone in the service area wince and cover their ears. What the hell was that? Gary, one of the men who had been pinning my left arm, took 2 steps back, his face turning the color of curdled milk. He looked at his hands as if he had just realized they were covered in my sweat and blood. Is this some kind of prank? Did Dave set this up? Dave doesn't prank like that. Marcus, the other friend, muttered. He pulled out his own phone. Look at the signal. I've got nothing. No bars. Not even emergency. I stood there, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face. The razor blade was still pressed against my collarbone, but my hand had stopped shaking. The tiny bead of blood on my neck had dried into a cold crust. I looked past them, toward the eastern horizon where the city lay. The morning light should have been a warm, golden yellow by now. Instead, the sky in the east was turning a bruised, swollen purple, like a rotting plum. The clouds weren't drifting. They were boiling, churning in place above the distant skyline. The truck drivers who had gathered to watch the domestic dispute were no longer looking at me. They were looking at their own phones, then at the eastern horizon. Look at that, one of them said, pointing a thick, scarred finger toward the highway they had just traveled. A flock of birds, thousands of them, crows, pigeons, starlings, flew overhead in a chaotic, silent mass. They weren't singing or calling, they were just flying southwest, so low that the draft from their wings stirred the dust on the service station pavement. Behind them, a thin, Gray haze began to creep along the asphalt of the interstate, flowing uphill against the wind, clinging to the tires of the parked semi-trucks like a living vapor. Maya, Daniel said. He turned to face me. The absolute certainty that had filled his eyes when he slapped me was gone, replaced by a frantic animal confusion. He still held the crumpled scratch-off ticket in his fist, his knuckles white. What did you do? What did your grandmother tell you? I didn't do anything, Daniel, I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. My throat felt dry, like it was lined with ash. My grandmother didn't cause this. She just knew the signs. The mountains don't forget when the earth is about to shift. I told you to run. It's a gas leak, Daniel said, though his voice lacked conviction. He stepped toward me, his boots clicking on the asphalt. A massive industrial accident. The chemical plant by the river. That has to be it. The money is still good. We just have to go to the next county. The lottery headquarters in the capital is 300 miles away. We can drive there. We don't have to go back to the city. You still don't get it, I said, taking a slow step backward toward the edge of the service area, where the steep, pine-covered slope of the foothills began. The money is gone, Daniel. The city is gone. Or it will be by noon. And if you stay on this highway, you're going to go down with it. Shut up, he roared, but it was the scream of a frightened child trying to scare away a ghost. He looked at Gary and Marcus. Get her. We're putting her in the car. We're driving west. We'll find a bank. We'll find a lawyer. We're not giving up $5 million because of some backwater voodoo. But neither Gary nor Marcus moved. They were staring at the highway. From the direction of the city, a sound was coming. It wasn't the sound of engines or horns. It was a deep, resonant hum, the sound of a tuning fork struck so hard it made the fillings in your teeth ache. The concrete beneath our feet began to vibrate, tiny pebbles dancing on the blacktop. Daniel, Gary whispered, his voice cracking. We're leaving. Now. The drive up the mountain pass was a blur of gray trees and the smell of burning rubber. We were in Daniel's heavy SUV, not because I wanted to go with them, but because when the ground began to shudder at the service station, Marcus and Gary had panicked, grabbing me by the arms and tossing me into the back seat like a piece of luggage before piling in themselves. Daniel had taken the wheel, his face a mask of sweating, twitching desperation. The highway behind us was already starting to clog. People who had left the city early for work or those who had lived on the western outskirts were beginning to realize something was wrong. Some cars were stopped on the shoulders there, drivers standing on the hoods, staring back at the towering wall of black dust that was slowly rising behind the hills, swallowing the sunrise. Why isn't the radio working? Daniel snarled, violently twisting the dial on the dashboard. Static screamed back at him, a wet, bubbling hiss that sounded like water boiling in a closed pipe. Every single station is dead. Even the emergency broadcast. The towers are down, Daniel, I said from the back seat, my back pressed against the door. I had my hand inside my pocket, my fingers tightly curled around the broken wooden bead. It was still warm, unphysically warm, like a small living ember. Or there's no one left to run them. You shut your mouth, Maya, he hissed, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. You're loving this, aren't you? You think you're some kind of prophet now. You think you're better than me because you wanted to live in a shack and eat dirt. I wanted to live, I said quietly. We're going to the cabin, Gary said from the passenger seat. His hands were clasped between his knees, shaking violently. Your grandmother's place. It's deep in the ridges, right? There's no roads up there except the old dirt tracks. If whatever's happening in the city spreads, the high ground is safe. That's what she said, right? She said the lightning struck would only grows where the earth's bones are strong, I said. The old peaks. The valleys are weak. They're like scabs over an old wound. When the wound opens, the scabs fall in. What kind of crazy talk is that? Marcus muttered from beside me. He had a flask out, gulping down cheap whiskey, his eyes wide and bloodshot. It's a tectonic shift, an earthquake. The fault line under the valley must have ruptured. If it was just an earthquake, the sky wouldn't be black, I replied. And your phones would still have satellite signals. This isn't the earth moving. This is the earth exhaling. Daniel slammed his hand against the steering wheel, the horn blaring for a brief, sharp second. I don't care what it is. As soon as this clears up, we're going to the capital. I have the ticket. It's right here. He patted his breast pocket, where the crumpled piece of cardboard was stuffed. 5 million. You think I'm going to let some bad weather and a couple of sinkholes take that away? From me? I worked 10 years in that damn warehouse. I took every double shift, I let my back go to hell, and now I'm rich. Nobody, not the government, not some mountain curse, and especially not you, is taking that from me. Before anyone could answer, the SUV's console screen suddenly flickered. The digital clock, which had been frozen at 4:12 a.m., began to spin rapidly backward. The GPS map, which had been showing our route as a red line winding through gray space, glitched, the roads dissolving into a chaotic jumble of green and blue lines that resembled a child's scribble. Then a voice came through the speakers. It wasn't a radio announcer. It was a woman's voice, high and raspy, distorted by static but unmistakably familiar. Daniel? Daniel, sweetie, are you there? Daniel gasped, his foot slipping on the gas pedal. The SUV fishtailed slightly on the gravel road before he corrected it. Mom? Linda? Daniel, it's so dark, the voice said. It didn't sound like it was coming from a phone. It sounded like it was being projected from the dashboard itself, hollow and thin. The lights went out 3 hours ago. I tried to go down the stairs, but the stairs aren't there anymore. There's a big hole where the lobby used to be, and the air smells like the river when the fish die. Daniel, please come get me. I have my jewelry. I have the silver tea set your father left us. We can sell it. Just come get me. Mom, Daniel screamed at the dashboard. Where are you? Are you still in the apartment? It's rising, Daniel. The voice continued, her tone shifting from panic to a strange, flat monotony. The black water. It doesn't wet your skin. It makes you heavy. My feet are so heavy. I can't lift them. Daniel, did you win the lottery? Tell me you won. Tell me we're going to be rich. Mom, I won. I have the ticket. I have 5 million. Daniel wept, his face contorting into an ugly mask of grief and greed. I'll buy you a house in the hills. Just go to the roof. Get to the roof, Mom. 5 million. The voice whispered. The static grew louder, a wet, sucking sound filling the car. That's nice, dear. But the roof is gone too. The sky is coming down. It looks like soot. It's so cold. A sharp, metallic pop echoed from the speakers, and the screen went completely black. A thin wisp of gray smoke curled out of the CD slot, smelling of melted plastic and copper. Daniel let out a long, shuddering sob, his head dropping toward the wheel before Gary grabbed it, forcing the car to stay on the road. Keep driving, Dan. Keep driving. Gary yelled. If we stop now, we're dead. I looked out the back window. The highway below us was no longer visible. A thick, impenetrable wall of dark gray mist had rolled over the foothills, swallowing the trees, the road, and the distant power lines. It didn't look like fog. It looked like a solid mass of ash, moving with a slow, deliberate weight, filling every valley and crevice, like water poured into a bowl. And it was rising. The dirt road leading to my grandmother's old village was barely a trail anymore. It had been abandoned 20 years ago when the state government built the new reservoir and forced the mountain people down into the valley towns, promising them modern plumbing and jobs in the factories. They had called the mountain people backward, superstitious, and stubborn. They had laughed at my grandmother when she refused to leave her cabin, claiming that the low valley was a trap for fools. It took 4 state troopers to drag her out of her home back then. She died 3 months later in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in the city, her lungs clogged with the humid, heavy air of the lowlands. Now, the SUV bounced violently over deep ruts and exposed pine roots. The branches of the ancient hemlocks scraped against the sides of the vehicle with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. The air had grown freezing cold. Our breath plumed in white clouds inside the cabin, but Daniel refused to turn on the heater, terrified that the engine would overheat on the steep incline. How much further? Marcus asked, his voice trembling. He had finished his whiskey and was now clutching the empty glass bottle as if it were a weapon. 2 miles, I said, my voice steady. But the car won't make it to the ridge. The road ends at the old creek bed. We'll have to walk from there. Walk. Daniel snarled, his eyes red and wild in the rearview mirror. In this? It's freezing. I'm not leaving the car. We have supplies in the back. We have water. We have blankets. The car is made of iron and oil, Daniel, I said. The mountain doesn't like iron. If you stay in the car, You'll slide down the ridge with it. You don't know anything, he yelled, but his voice was weak. He was shivering, his fingers stiff on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The forest around us was dead silent. There were no crickets, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush, no wind in the high canopy. The only sound was the laboring roar of the SUV's V8 engine and the wet crunch of gravel beneath the tires. As we rounded a sharp bend, the headlights caught something in the middle of the road. Daniel slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the wet leaves. It was a deer, a large, 12-point buck. It was standing perfectly still in the center of the track, its head turned toward us. But it wasn't looking at the headlights. Its eyes were completely black, the pupils dilated so wide that no white showed at all. From its nostrils, a thick, dark fluid, not red blood, but something resembling liquid charcoal, dripped slowly onto the dirt. The buck didn't run. It didn't even flinch at the sound of the engine. It stood there, its legs stiff and straight, like a wooden carving. Get out of the way. Daniel honked the horn. The buck didn't move. Slowly, its neck began to twist, not in a natural, fluid motion, but with a series of wet, popping sounds that echoed even inside the insulated cabin of the SUV. Its head turned a full 90 degrees, its black eyes staring directly through the windshield at us. Then its front legs simply collapsed. They didn't bend at the joints. They snapped like dry twigs, the bone protruding through the gray hide. The buck fell forward into the dirt, but its head remained upright, still staring at us as the dark fluid began to pool beneath its chest, turning the dry leaves black. Oh my God, Gary whimpered, covering his mouth. Oh my God, what is that?
Is it diseased?
Is it rabies? It's the weight, I said, my hand tightening on the broken bead. The valley air is heavy now. It's pulling everything down. The animals feel it first. Their bones can't hold them up. Shut up. Shut up. Daniel screamed. He shifted the car into reverse, but the tires just spun in the loose shale behind us, throwing up a shower of sparks. We walk, Marcus said, his voice flat with terror. He didn't wait for Daniel. He grabbed his jacket, shoved his door open, and tumbled out into the cold mountain air. Gary looked at Daniel, then at the dying deer in the road, and followed. Daniel sat there for a second, his chest heaving. He looked at the dashboard, which was now dead, then at the crumpled lottery ticket in his fist. Slowly, carefully, he smoothed out the paper against his thigh, folded it into a neat square, and tucked it deep inside his heavy winter coat. If we get up there, and there's nothing, he said, turning his head slowly to look at me in the back seat. If this is just some trick you played to get me away from my money, I'm going to throw you off the highest cliff on this mountain, Maya. If we don't get up there, Daniel, I said, opening my door, you won't have to. The air on the ridge tasted like wet stone and ancient pine. It was thin and sharp, burning my lungs with every breath, but it was clean. There was no smell of burnt copper or wet soot here. We walked in single file along the overgrown trail, the gray mist clinging to our heels like a pack of silent dogs. It didn't cross the ridge line. It seemed to pool in the deep gorges below, turning the valleys into silent, white lakes, from which only the highest peaks emerged like lonely islands. The old village was nothing but a dozen collapsed log cabins, their roofs long since claimed by rot and heavy winter snows. In the center of the clearing stood the remnants of the old stone chapel, the only structure still fully upright, its dark, basalt walls covered in thick green moss. Behind the chapel was the lightning tree. It was a colossal oak, its trunk split down the middle as if by a giant's axe. 70 years ago, according to my grandmother, a bolt of lightning had struck the tree during a freak winter storm. The strike had killed the tree, but instead of rotting, the wood had hardened into something akin to iron. It was from a branch of this tree that my grandmother's father had carved the rosary I wore. We're here, Gary said, collapsing onto a mossy stone step near the chapel entrance. He was panting, his forehead slick with cold sweat. Now what? What do we do now, Maya? How long do we stay here? Until the mist recedes, I said, sitting down on a dry log. Or until there's nowhere left to go. That's it. Daniel strode into the center of the clearing, his heavy boots kicking up chunks of moss. That's your big plan? We sit in some rotten church and wait? For what? To starve? There's a spring behind the chapel, I said. And the cabins have dry wood. We can build a fire. The mist won't come up here. The ground is too hard. I have $5 million. Daniel roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the chapel. I should be in a penthouse in Chicago. I should be buying a boat, hiring people to carry my bags. And I'm sitting in the mud with a bunch of losers and a crazy woman. Daniel, shut up, Marcus said from the doorway of the chapel. He had found a dry spot inside and was trying to light a cigarette with a cheap plastic lighter. His hands were shaking so hard, he kept dropping it. Just shut up. About the money. Look around you. There is no Chicago. There is no bank. We're lucky we're breathing. You're a coward, Marcus. Daniel sneered, walking up to him. Just like Gary. You both let a woman with a wooden toy scare you into running. As soon as the sun comes up tomorrow, I'm taking the SUV and I'm going down. I'll find a way. Around the mist. There's got to be a road through the northern pass. There is no northern pass, Daniel, I said. The whole valley is gone.
Look.
I pointed toward the north. Through a gap in the pine trees, we could see the distant plain where the state highway connected our city to the rest of the world. The plain was gone. In its place was a vast, shimmering sheet of black liquid, perfectly flat and
Still.
it didn't reflect the sky or the stars. It was a void, a hole in the world, that seemed to absorb all light. Far in the distance, the tops of a few high-voltage transmission towers poked out of the blackness like skeletal fingers before slowly, silently tilting and sliding beneath the surface without creating a single ripple.
Daniel stared at it.
His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the lottery ticket. He looked at it, then at the black lake below, then back at the ticket. And then he began to laugh. It was a dry, rattling sound that started in his chest and bubbled up into a frantic, high-pitched giggle. He held the ticket up to the dark sky as if showing it to God. 5 million, he whispered. 5 million. I'm the richest man in the graveyard. Daniel, Gary said, standing up, his face filled with pity. Put it away. Let's get a fire started. It's getting dark. Don't touch me. Daniel screamed, flinching away from Gary's hand.
He tucked
the ticket back into his coat, his eyes wild and defensive. You're all jealous. You want it. You think if I die up here, you can take it. You, Marcus, you've been looking at my pocket the whole time we were walking. And you, Maya, you want to divorce me so you can take half. That's what this is. This whole thing. You set this up. You poisoned the well. You put something in Dave's drink, you. He was completely gone. The pressure, the loss of his mother, the realization of his useless wealth, it had cracked his mind wide open. He took a step toward me, his hands curling into claws. Give me the rosary. No, I said, standing up and stepping back. Give it to me, he yelled. It's made of the wood from this tree, right? If the wood keeps the harm away, then it's valuable. It's worth more than the ticket.
now.
Give it to me, or I'll take it off your neck myself. Daniel, stop. Gary yelled, rushing forward to grab his shoulder. But Daniel was stronger, fueled by a manic, desperate energy. He swung his elbow back, catching Gary square in the nose with a sickening crunch. Gary fell backward into the moss, clutching his face as blood poured between his fingers. Marcus stood in the chapel doorway, frozen, his unlit cigarette dropping from his lips. Daniel turned back to me. He took a heavy step forward. And then, from beneath my shirt, there was a sound. Snap. It wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the mountain ridge, it sounded like a pistol shot. A cold shockwave rippled through my chest. I reached up and felt the rosary. Another bead, the second one, the one directly below the first broken link, had cracked clean in half. The two wooden semicircles fell out from under my collar and hit the stone pavement of the clearing with two distinct, dry clicks. The warning wasn't for the city anymore. The danger was here. The air in the clearing suddenly grew thick. It didn't turn dark, but the light seemed to lose its clarity, turning a heavy, greasy gray. My lungs felt tight, as if I were breathing wet wool. Daniel stopped. He looked down at the two halves of the broken bead resting on the moss between us. His eyes narrowed, the frantic madness in them replaced by a cold, calculating malice. 2 beads, he whispered. Your grandmother said if one cracks, you run.
What
Happens when the second one breaks, Maya? Does the ghost come out? Does the mountain fall? The warning is for you, Daniel, I said, my voice cold and flat. The first bead was the city. The second bead is the house. The third bead is the blood. There is no third bead, he snarled. He lunged. He was fast, but I had spent my childhood running these ridges. I ducked to the left, his heavy coat brushing against my shoulder as he stumbled past me. I ran toward the stone chapel, my boots slipping on the wet moss. "Marcus, help me!" I screamed as I reached the door. But Marcus was already gone. He had fled into the dark interior of the chapel, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls as he climbed the rotting wooden stairs to the old bell tower, seeking some illusion of height. "There's nowhere to run, Maya." Daniel's voice was close behind me. "You're not leaving this mountain with my money. We're going down together, or we're staying here forever." I ran into the dark of the chapel. The air inside smelled of old tallow, dry rot and cold stone. The altar was gone, replaced by a heap of fallen roof timbers, but the heavy oak doors that led to the vestry were still intact.
I
Slammed them shut behind me and slid the rusted iron bolt into place just as Daniel's body crashed against the wood on the other side. The door shuddered, dust falling from the stone archway above. "Open it," he roared, slamming his fist against the oak. "Open the door, Maya. You can't stay in there forever. There's no food, no water." I didn't answer. I backed away from the door, my eyes adjusting to the dim light of the vestry. There was a high, narrow window on the back wall, its leaded glass long since shattered. Through it, I could see the split trunk of the lightning tree rising, like a pair of black horns against the gray sky.
thud.
The door shuttered again. A crack appeared in the center panel of the oak. Daniel was using a heavy stone from the clearing to batter his way in.
Thud.
"I'm going to tear that necklace off your throat," he screamed, his voice cracking with exertion. "I'm going to sell every single bead. I'll buy a new life. I'll buy a new mother. I'll buy everything." I looked at the window. It was too narrow for me to squeeze through with my
Winter coat on.
I quickly unzipped my jacket and threw it to the floor, standing in my thin flannel shirt. The cold hit me like a bucket of ice water, but I didn't care. I climbed onto a heap of old hymnals beneath the window, grabbed the stone ledge, and hauled myself up. The rough granite scraped the skin off my palms, but I ignored the pain, dragging my legs through the narrow opening and tumbling out into the wet dirt behind the chapel. I landed hard on my shoulder, rolling into the weeds. As I scrambled to my feet, I heard a splintering crash from inside the vestry. The door had given way. "Maya!" Daniel's voice came from inside the room. I didn't run down the path. I ran toward the lightning tree. Its trunk was massive, 5 feet in diameter, the bark black and deeply furrowed. The split in the middle was wide enough for a person to stand inside. It was here, my grandmother had told me, that her father had found the heartwood, the part of the tree that had taken the full force of the sky's fire and turned to stone. I stepped into the split of the tree, my back pressing against the cold, iron-hard wood. The air inside the trunk was different. It didn't smell like the gray mist or the dead valley. It smelled of ozone, of sharp, clean electricity, like the air right before a summer storm. The pressure in my chest eased. Through the gap in the wood, I saw Daniel round the corner of the chapel. He was holding a heavy, jagged piece of basalt in his right hand.
His coat was
torn, his face smeared with dirt and Gary's dried blood. He looked like an animal, a starving wolf that had cornered its prey, but didn't know how to kill
it.
"I see you," he whispered, his eyes locking onto the dark opening of the tree. He began to walk toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. "You think you're safe in there? You think your little tree is going to save you?" He stopped 5 feet from the opening. The wind had completely died.
The gray
Mist from the gorge was beginning to spill over the edge of the clearing, creeping across the moss toward his boots. "This is it," Daniel said, raising the stone. "This is where your little story ends." I reached down and grabbed the wooden cross of my rosary. I closed my eyes and whispered the words my grandmother had taught me when I was a child, words I had thought were just a nursery rhyme to keep away the dark. "Fire of the sky, bone of the clay, keep the heavy dark away. What is light shall rise and sing, what is heavy, the earth shall cling." "Stop talking," Daniel screamed, lunging forward, his hand raising the stone to strike. But as his boots stepped onto the roots of the lightning tree, there was a sound. It wasn't a snap. It was a deep, metallic thrum, like a massive iron cable snapping under tension. The ground beneath Daniel's feet didn't shake. It simply became soft. The moss, the dirt, the solid stone of the ridge, it dissolved into a thick, black slurry that swallowed his boots up to the ankles in a fraction of a second. Daniel gasped, dropping the stone. He tried to pull his right foot free, but the Movement only caused his left foot to sink deeper. What is this? He whimpered, his hands clawing at the empty air. Gary. Marcus. Help me. There was no answer from the chapel. Gary was gone, and Marcus was hiding in the tower, too terrified to move. The black liquid was rising fast. It was already at his knees. It didn't look like mud. It was perfectly clean, a dark, oily void that seemed to have no weight of its own, but possessed an infinite draft, pulling him down with a silent, terrible force. Maya. Daniel reached his hands out toward me. His fingers were inches from the opening of the tree, but he couldn't lean forward. The weight was pulling him straight down, his body sinking into the earth as if he were standing in dry
Sand.
Maya, please. Grab my hand. I have the ticket. We can share it. 50-50. 70-30. Just take my hand. I didn't move. I stayed within the split of the tree, my hands wrapped around the iron hardwood. The money is heavy, Daniel, I said, my voice quiet and sad. The ticket is heavy. Your mother told you. The air is heavy now. You have to let it go. No, he screamed, the black liquid rising to his chest. He frantically reached into his coat with his left hand, pulling out the folded, crumpled scratch-off
Ticket.
He held it up, his face contorted in a mixture of greed and terror. It's 5 million. It's mine. I won it. The black liquid reached his collar. With a final, desperate cry, he tried to throw the ticket toward the opening of the tree, toward me. But the paper never reached the wood. The moment the ticket left his hand, it didn't flutter in the wind. It fell, straight down, as heavy as a lead weight, striking the black surface of the liquid and sinking instantly out of sight. Daniel's eyes went wide. No, he whispered. The black liquid rose over his chin, his nose, his eyes. There was no struggle. No bubbles, no splash. The earth simply closed its mouth over him, the dark surface smoothing out until it was as flat and still as a mirror. The clearing was silent again. I stayed inside the split of the lightning tree until the sun rose. When the light finally came, it wasn't the bruised, swollen purple of the day
Before.
It was a pale, clean white, breaking through the high mountain clouds and spilling across the empty clearing. The gray mist was gone. It had receded back into the valleys, leaving behind a world that looked completely different. I stepped out of the tree. My legs were stiff, my body shivering from the cold, but my heart was steady. I looked down at the ground where Daniel had stood. There was nothing. No sign of a struggle, no hole in the dirt, no black liquid. The green moss was perfectly dry and undisturbed, except for 2 tiny, semicircular pieces of dark wood lying near the roots of the tree. I knelt down and picked them up. I looked at the rosary around my neck. Only 10 beads remained on the chain.
The
rest of the wood was gone, but the wire that held them together was still strong, shining in the morning sun like a thread of silver. I walked into the stone chapel. Gary was sitting on the steps of the altar, his face wrapped in a torn piece of his shirt. He was alive, but he looked 10 years older, his eyes hollow and staring into the corner of the room. Is he gone? Gary asked, his voice a dry whisper.
He's gone, I said.
And the money? The earth took it, I said. It took everything that was heavy. Gary nodded slowly. He didn't ask any more questions.
He didn't ask about the
ticket or the city or his own home. He knew, as I did, that those things no longer existed in the way they once had. Marcus came down from the bell tower a few minutes later. He didn't look at either of us. He simply walked to the chapel door, looked out at the vast, silent blue of the mountain sky, and sat down on the threshold, his head in his hands. We stayed in the village of the lightning-struck wood for 3 days. We drank from the spring, we slept in the dry corners of the chapel, and we didn't talk about the city. On the 4th morning, a helicopter, not a military one, but a white search and rescue chopper with the markings of the Western State Guard, flew over the ridge. It circled twice before landing in the flat meadow below the clearing. 2 men in heavy gray uniforms got out, their faces covered in thick filtration masks, though they quickly pulled them down when they felt the clean, sharp air of the ridge. Are you the survivors from Route 90? One of them asked as we walked down to
meet them.
Yes, Gary said. The guard looked at us, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and professional detachment. You're lucky. You're the only ones we've found from the Eastern Valley. The whole basin, it's gone. Some kind of massive subterranean collapse. The EPA is calling it a localized tectonic liquefaction event, but he shook his head, looking toward the distant horizon where the Black Lake still lay, silent and still. Nobody really knows what happened.
The
Water just rose out of the ground and took the city down. We knew, I said quietly, my hand resting on the small wooden cross at my
chest.
The guard looked at me, his eyes lingering on my dirty clothes, my scraped hands, and the broken rosary around my neck. He didn't ask what I meant.
He had
Seen too much over the last 3 days to argue with a survivor from the high ridges. Get in, he said, opening the door of the helicopter. We're taking you west. The camps are set up in the desert. There's food, water, and medical care. I climbed into the cabin, Gary and Marcus following close behind. As the helicopter lifted off, rising above the ancient hemlocks and the basalt walls of the chapel, I looked down one last time. The lightning tree stood tall and split in the center of the ridge, its dark branches reaching toward the sky like old bones. Below it, the valleys were filled with a clean, white mist that was slowly dissolving in the heat of the afternoon sun, revealing a new, empty world. I reached into my pocket and let the two halves of the broken bead slip through my fingers, falling into the green forest below. They belonged to the mountain now, and so did I.